Hey guys, Mo Trapper. So I wanted to talk today about some differences in traps, just so people can understand what we're talking about and what's going on as far as when they see pictures of traps or whenever people show them traps or talk about traps, they can kind of understand what the differences are. Um, and this came from um, a thread a guy posted a picture of. Actually, it was an old Victor Stoploss trap, #1 long spring Stoploss, and said, I got these traps, I think from a relative maybe, and he couldn't remember what the guy had said as far as what kind of trap this was. So, um, and then a guy responded and said, "Isn't that a jump trap?" And it's actually not a jump trap. Jump traps are a little bit different. So I wanted to go over the difference between long spring, jump traps, and coil spring traps, and then we'll talk about stop loss, and then we'll also talk about double jaw, because that was another thing that kind of came up in that thread. So, um, the kind of the original trap, the first traps were long spring traps, and long spring just meaning this piece of metal is just one long piece, and that's the tension is that long piece basically being pushed down and then popping back up. That's how the trap works. Basically, that long spring is going to be compressed, right, in order to give the trap power. So that long spring is compressed. We gotta get this around so that jaw will lay flat. So this is compressed right here, and then whenever you fire the trap, it goes up and and pushes those jaws together and holds them tight. And long spring traps are really good for holding because they tend to ride up very high on the jaws, and they have a lot of pressure on the high side. But they're kind of big. It's a big footprint overall, right? So this is a #1 size trap, a muskrat size trap. But even when you bend it back, it's a pretty big footprint. So that's a long spring trap, and there are double long spring traps as well. So same idea, it's just you've got a long spring on either side of the jaws, right? Then you come to the jump trap. So this is a jump trap, and it's similar to a long spring trap in the way that it works. The mechanism that makes the jaws close is still a long flat piece of metal, and you can see on this that the base is actually bent a little bit, and this spring is bent a little bit, and when you push those together, you get that effect of putting that spring into this piece, which is going to cause it to come up and put pressure on the jaws. So, and these are a little harder to set. You kind of have to get a hold of them down here on the chain in order to get them opened up. But I'll set it for you just so you guys can kind of see what we're working with here. And they don't make jump traps anymore, so nobody's actually producing these anymore. It's kind of an outdated style, but this is how it would look set. You can see that those two are now much closer together, and then we'll go in and fire it here, and that's how those work. So that's a jump trap, and that was kind of the second step in the evolution. It's a smaller footprint, so if you're going to bury these traps especially, it's much easier to bury something this size than it is something with a great big long spring hanging off of it, or even something with 2 long springs, right? Much smaller footprint. But as you can see, you're only putting pressure on one side of the jaws with this, and it's just not quite as effective in holding animals as this single long spring, or the latest revolution or latest evolution in traps is a coil spring trap, right? So there's 2 coiled springs that put pressure on both jaws, not just one, right? And this is kind of the latest thing, and the overall footprint is again much smaller than something like this, but you also get a lot of benefits over something like this where you have a lot of spring tension and it's on both sides of the trap equally. So if an animal were to work itself or end up being caught on one side or the other, you don't have that chance of being able to pull out just because they're on the side that doesn't have the good spring tension on it. So, and this is a coil spring trap, obviously. So that's the difference between long spring traps, jump traps, and coil spring traps. So the other thing, the particular trap that the guy was talking about was a stop loss trap, and this is a number 1 Victor stop loss. It's very similar to the one that he had pictured, if not the same trap. And there were some questions about what is this bar, this extra spring, and this is called a stop loss feature. So when muskrats get caught, they have a tendency to do what's called ringing out or ringing off. And basically that just means they twist. They twist and twist and twist and twist and twist until the hand that's caught or the paw that's caught is actually broken and then completely ripped off. So they'll break the bone and then work through the muscle and the hair and the fur and everything, and that paw will actually fall off and they'll be able to escape the trap. So this is to prevent that. So what happens is, and they set a little different than anything else, and they're just a little bit of a funky trap. But basically the way it works, and this one is actually a rod dog or a bar dog rather than a traditional dog. But that's how you would set this trap. And then this plate would go up over that bar, and on this it actually is stamped, use this plate to delay action of guard. So you're gonna, the first thing that's gonna happen is they're gonna step in a trap and they're gonna get caught, right? So caught in the trap. As I'm fighting and pulling to get back in the water or get away, that guard's gonna release, okay? So, and that guard is basically just made to hold the muskrat over to one side, put him off center. There's not a lot of pressure there at all. It's just kind of gently pushing, keeping them from being able to spin and affect the jaw or the paw that's through the jaw, right? So they can't ring off if they have that tension put on them and they're pushed to the one side like that. So that's what a stop loss trap is. That's what it does. And this bar would not be engaged immediately. It would be delayed by the action of the keeper here. So that's a stop loss trap. That's what it does. That's how they work. And another thing that was discussed was raccoons, and would that keep raccoons from chewing out? And then somebody brought up, double jaw traps. And double jaw traps are a little different too. So you can see this is a number 11 Sleepy Creek. But this is actually a double jaw trap. So you have the jaw here, and then on a double jaw trap there's going to be a stamped portion of the jaw itself that's pushed down, and that's what you get right here. So there's a jaw and then a second jaw underneath of it on both sides. That's a double jaw, and that is to prevent raccoons. They get out of traps a little differently than muskrats. They don't tend to ring off, they tend to chew off. So they will actually chew their paw off. And this gives a little bit of space so that they can't chew the paw all the way up to the jaw itself, which usually there's enough still left in the jaw that they can't pull out. Even if they chew off everything down here, there's still that space between the jaw and the double jaw of paw that's left in the trap, so they still can't get their paw out. Even if they chew all this, they still can't get out. So that's a double jaw. And basically all these modifications are just ways that trap manufacturers came up with to deal with problems, right? So in a trap like this with no stop loss, muskrat trappers were getting a lot of ring offs. They were getting a lot of traps that were fired, but they didn't have a muskrat in them, right? So the muskrats were figuring out a way to get out of the traps. So they came up with the stop loss, right? So this is just another mechanical piece that they add to the trap that keeps that animal from being able to ring out once they're caught. Same thing with the raccoons, right? So this is a number 11, so it's a double long spring, which is a lot more powerful. They can't pull over to an edge that doesn't have pressure on it and pull out. So this is better at holding a raccoon. And then of course, you have the chew out issue. So they came up with another modification to the trap to try to prevent that. So that's the difference basically between long springs, jump traps, and coil spring traps, and just a brief explanation of the way that a stop loss trap works, and a double jaw trap as well, and kind of what they're made to prevent. So that's it. I hope if you already knew all that you agree that I'm correct in all my assessments and definitions. And if you didn't know that, now you do. Thanks.